reducing industries. And this is very important in the realm of economic geography because when you think about it, the nature of the two industries often determines where you find a lot of these industries. We're going to start with bulk gaining industries. With bulk gaining industries, you have things like you're building cars, you're building things having to do with electronics, you've got beverage bottling plants. And the one thing they all have in common, as you build, as you produce, more bulk is added on. And because of that, the geography of bulk gaining industries is very interesting. You tend to want to have your bulk you tend to want to have your bulk gaining industries near places. You want to have it very localized. Like, for instance, you take, for instance, a bottling plant, water or pop or beer or some other beverage. You want to have your bulk distributed locally. And there's a reason for that. You take beverages, you take something like water, you take something like pop, take something like beer, beer especially beer. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a moment. You take these beverages, they gain bulk as you produce them and as you ship them out. There is only so far that you can ship these beverages before it gets a little expensive because of the amount of weight carried. Because you got to think, if you're carrying a product that's very heavy. It requires a lot of fuel. It requires a lot of energy to take that product over a long distance. You're going to want to have something like your bottling plant very close by. I'll give you an example. Where I live, we have a lot of beverages that are, obviously I live in metropolitan Atlanta. We are home to Coca Cola. And obviously we got the bottling plant here. But when you think about beer and other beverages, you tend to want to have your beer produced nearby, or you want to have your other beverages close by. Because I go to the store, I notice some of the beer that's being shipped in, no matter what brand it is, some of that beer is not, the plant that it was produced at isn't far away. You know, somewhere like Cartersville, you know, you have to think about beer. Number one, beer is either going to be in an aluminum can or a glass bottle. And the one thing about a glass bottle, glass itself is heavy. I gotta turn this off for a moment. But you have to think about the nature of beer. The beverage itself weighs a lot. The glass bottle that they put it in, or the aluminum can that they put it in, weighs a lot. And when you really consider how much that weighs, you begin to understand why you tend to want to have your beer produced locally, why you tend to not. You want to have, like, you want to have it travel as short a distance as possible because of the amount of weight. The amount of weight from the glass bottle, the amount of weight from the contents itself. The liquid contents plus that beer bottle is heavy. So you have very localized bottling plants. And then let's take something else. Dairy. Dairy products, you tend to not want them shipped very far. It's a bulk gaining industry too, because of the very nature. You got to put milk in a bottle, but there's an addition to this. Milk will spoil if you don't prep it properly. Milk, you can't carry milk over a long distance. You just can't. You have something, a milk shed, a amount of distance that your milk is allowed to travel. And so when they're making the milk has to be very localized. And because the milk has to be localized, that's an example of how a bulk gaining industry works. And now I'm going to get into bulk reducing. Bulk reducing industry, examples of this would be the steel industry, the copper industry. I'm going to give you an example. You've got, you know, the way a bulk reducing industry works, it's as you process it, you have to get certain impurities out of an ore, or you have to process it a certain way to where the final product is much smaller in weight than what you started with. You take, for instance, the copper industry. You think about where there are copper smelters at. You have to be near a good energy source. Then you have to be very close to where the copper ore is. And then you have to, in order to smelt copper, the copper, production, the input has to be local. Yes, I got it, Steve. I was about to get into my little discussion about copper and how it ties into this discussion. The thing about the copper industry, you have to really think about it. Copper, the copper ore has to be mined. And when you're mining copper ore, you have to ship it as close to the smelter as you can. Copper is my favorite metal. Hmm. I was hoping you'd come in. And yes, the state of Michigan, well, actually, specifically the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, is where the copper industry in the United States sort of just took off because copper has been there. And one thing about copper, you know, all the smelters will be up there, and because of the nature of copper, you got to mine that stuff. You can't. You don't. I'm here for. I got it. I understand. When you think about copper, you don't want to ship the copper ore very far. You don't want to ship iron ore very far. You don't want to ship those ores very far. So you're going to want to put your steel. This has been a hard night for streaming. But when you think about where copper is, when you think about where you don't want to have your copper smelter being so far away from the source. You want to be near a good energy source. You want to be very close to where the copper is so you can process that copper, so you can smelt it, and then you can go ship it wherever you want because you can ship the finished product anywhere you want because the bulk's been reduced and you can ship it literally a long distance, but the initial product you really don't want to ship it too far. You want to have your input being localized. And the same goes with the steel industry. The steel industry, you look at the places that had like the biggest, like back in the days of the big American industrials machine. Cities like Pittsburgh, and I'm not stopping. But you think about the big days of the industrial machines. when we were producing so much steel in cities like Pittsburgh, Birmingham, Cleveland. You think about Duluth, Minnesota. You think about the cities in the Midwest. You have access to water resources in the form of the Great Lakes, the Ohio River. You think about, because you had the ships, you know, you got good water transportation. You can ship iron ore for quite a while. You can ship coal. You can ship other resources that are needed. But you don't want to ship them too far because the initial product is heavy. With Birmingham, Alabama, it became a big steel producing city because all the resources, the limestone, the steel, the iron ore, the everything that's needed to produce the steel, the iron ore, the coal, everything else, all of that's within a short distance. Same, Pittsburgh, major producer of coal. You had a lot of steel because the coal wasn't that far away. You could get the iron ore. Same with Duluth, Minnesota. The iron ore is right there. All these cities producing steel because the resources aren't that far away, and it's a bulk reducing industry because you have to process all of it before you get the final product, which is somewhat lighter. And with that, you can ship it as many places as you can. But the production has to be local. The input has to be local. Whereas with a bulk gaining industry, you can get the resources from anywhere. But the but the final product, you don't want to ship it that far. You want it to be more local. Your bulk reducing, you want to ship it, you can ship it to many places, but the initial production, you want it localized. You want it in specific places because of the distance and because of the way of getting it there. And I think that'll be it for this live stream. I'm going to stop here before any more mishaps take place with YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Till next time, this is the Geo Scholar.